Hi guys, so I'm Honest Mum and I wanted to chat with a good friend of mine, Dr. Juliet McGrattan, who we talk to each other lots of the time on the phone and very often and meet up lots, although not lately because of COVID. But Juliet is like a fountain of wisdom, aren't you, Juliet? And today we're going to be talking about polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, something that I suffer with, and we're going to demystify lots of things about it. So hi Juliet, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and then we can crack on with chatting about PCOS?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Yeah, as Vicki said, I'm Juliet. I'm a former GP turned health writer, author, and a bit of a fitness freak. I love using kind of health and exercise for well-being. So particularly things centered around women's health. So I'm really happy to talk about PCOS today.
Yeah. So Juliet, first of all, what is the difference? Is there a difference between PCO and PCOS? It seems to be PCOS is what people refer to most commonly now. I was diagnosed at 19, so this is a condition that I've had for, I've known to have had for sort of almost 20 years now. So it'd be good to get to the nuts and bolts of it to start with.
Yeah, and I think it's important to do that because it is confusing and there is a lot of confusion surrounding polycystic ovaries and polycystic ovary syndrome. So PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. You can have PCO without having the syndrome. So if we just talk about, first of all, to have the syndrome, what you need is 2 of 3 criteria, or at least 2 of 3 criteria. And those criteria are: 1, you need to have multiple little follicles, little tiny cysts seen on your ovaries. That's usually seen by ultrasound scan. That's not the same as ovarian cysts. They're much bigger. We're talking about little kind of 8 millimeter, multiple little follicles. Okay, so that's 1. Number 2, you need to have either blood tests or signs in your body that show that you've got an imbalance in your male to female hormone ratio. So you have an increase in what we call androgens, which are the male hormones, testosterone being the most common. So that might be shown on a blood test in your hormone profile, or it might be shown in symptoms and signs in your body. Quite commonly, those are things like acne, hair growth, excess hair growth either on your face or your chest, or sometimes in your lower abdomen, sometimes increasing weight, and alongside hair growth you sometimes get hair loss, kind of balding in women. So those kind of things show that maybe your testosterone levels are a little bit high. So you've got your follicles on your ovary, your high testosterone levels or symptoms of them in your body. And then the third one is a change in your periods where you have absent or few periods. So if you have 2 or 3 of those, then you've got what we call polycystic ovarian syndrome. Okay, but you can have polycystic ovaries, the first one of those, and not have the other 2. So you can have the polycystic ovaries, but without the syndrome and without the consequences of the syndrome. Similarly, you could have, you might not have the follicles on your ultrasound scan on your ovaries, but you might have the other 2. So you could actually have polycystic ovarian syndrome without necessarily seeing polycystic follicles on your ovary. Does that make sense? So you need 2 of those.
I think the most common tends to be PCOS, doesn't it, with people that are symptomatic generally.
Yeah, and it is very common. I mean, some quotes will say 1 in 5 women, some say 1 in 10 women could have this, but that's still a huge amount. And lots of women don't actually have any symptoms from it, even as many as half. So
yeah, and I know people that only discovered they have PCOS when they were trying for a baby, and they maybe tried longer than they'd anticipated or needed help, and then they were diagnosed with PCOS. I was diagnosed at 19 because I started to have symptoms like weight gain and didn't have a period for 9 months and things like that. So I had a scan. It's an ultrasound, isn't it, that they give you? Very similar to later on when I was pregnant, a very similar kind of scan where they sort of showed me all the little cysts. There are physical and emotional impacts that come with having this condition. So I think it'd be really good to talk about that. And obviously to talk about kind of PMT that can go hand in hand. It can become more acute with PCOS. I mean, first off, do we know why we get PCOS? Like,
Not
what
really.
are the causes?
We don't really know is the honest answer. We think it does seem to run in some families, so that would suggest that there is a kind of a genetic link and an inheritance in PCOS for many women, but we don't fully understand it. We do know a little bit about what we think the kind of, not necessarily the cause, but we think it's to do with partly how your body responds to insulin. If you've become very insulin resistant, so your body doesn't respond so well to insulin levels are higher, then that high level of insulin can have a knock-on effect as to how much and of what ratio of hormones your ovaries produce, because it's your female and male hormones are partly produced by your ovaries. So with high levels of insulin resistance, high levels of insulin, it does have this knock-on effect and can increase the testosterone levels and the male androgen hormones levels in your ovaries. So that's partly what we think. So it's interesting with the weight, because you can get kind of caught in a little bit of a cycle, really, because high insulin levels, high insulin resistance can make it difficult for you to lose weight, and easy for you to gain weight. But then when you gain weight, that can in turn push those insulin resistance up higher. So you can get very caught up in a cycle, which is really
really tough. I remember the specialist that I saw saying to me that I would need to work twice as hard at weight loss as someone without PCOS, because my body was essentially fighting for me to gain weight. So there are things that I've been recommended to do to change my diet. Exercise is something that really helps, I think, physically and when it comes to stress. I've recently returned back to a low carb way of eating, which several doctors had recommended me trying. I'm actually just reading this book at the moment, which he also Dr. Josh Axe talks a lot about it. Now, obviously, we don't expect you to endorse diets or sort of go into huge detail, but the sort of that he's saying that the relationship means that you can help your balance your hormones essentially by sort of not overdoing it with carbs, which kind of makes sense to me, because if you're diabetic or you do have high insulin levels, then the carbs seem to worsen the way that your body works in that respect. I mean, I'm not a doctor, obviously, you are, but I'm giving it a good go, and it seems to be something fairly sustainable. But I definitely think when I was looking at kind of weight loss after my kids as well, and I was lucky to conceive quite easily, that sort of seemed to work for my body. But I think with diets, it's individual, isn't it? But lots of sources recommend that way of eating for women with polycystic ovary online.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to know there is no cure for polycystic ovarian syndrome. So it is looking at what you can do to minimize your symptoms and the effect it's having on your body. And certainly lifestyle changes, looking at your exercise, looking at your diet to see what you can do to make things better is crucial. And whilst exercise is really important for lots of reasons, for some people it doesn't always lead to weight loss. So I think, and we do know that if women are overweight with polycystic ovarian syndrome, if they can lose a little bit of weight, their symptoms will improve, sometimes enough to even bring back a regular cycle. So I think it is important that you do look at the exercise and the diet, and it's pretty well known really that reducing your carbs for PCOS and helping to reduce your insulin resistance can be very beneficial for women. So it's definitely something to look at.
Yeah, and it does often feel like a catch-22, because when I have spoken to specialists, and I remember meeting a sort of specialist in PMS and PMT, a doctor who had said that stress is such a huge kind of culprit when it comes to PMT and all of these sorts of things. But then because you've got more cortisol anyway, and your body's kind of, you find it easier to become stressed, I don't know. Or I know that if I eat a lot of sugar, for example, I can feel that spike and then the drop, and your mood crashes, and it feels quite acute when you're suffering with this condition. So sometimes you feel quite trapped within that cycle. And I found for myself, this is helping me, this kind of lower carb option, and also trying to minimize stress as much as possible to help manage the emotional side that comes particularly around kind of ovulation, and then after that with PMS and stuff. I find that you know, it can be quite difficult. So running for me helps. And I bought a treadmill recently, which means I don't have any excuses. If it's raining outside, I'm like, okay, I can go on that. But also looking at ways to use meditation. And I've actually found when it comes to diet that intermittent fasting has worked quite well for me, where I just don't eat breakfast most days. And that's, and I've read a lot on the benefits of that. But I think it's about sort of working out what works for you, but read the literature out there as well, and talk to your doctor before sort of
definitely.
diet.
But I think you mentioned the stress of being a consequence of it, and I think it is really important to think about that, because we know that it can be really, really unpredictable. For many women, they don't know when they're going to get a period. It may be several months, and often in the build up to that, you can have kind of PMT symptoms and then not actually ovulate, because with polycystic ovary syndrome, you often the follicles that grow and develop don't have eggs in them, or they're underdeveloped, so you don't actually ovulate, which can then obviously have a knock-on effect to your fertility. And there's nothing more stressful than somebody who wants to get pregnant, who finds that they're not having a regular cycle, they don't know when their periods are coming. So the psychological impact of that and the uncertainty of that, along with the irregularity of the cycles, can just like turn everything completely upside down.
Yeah, I think, so for myself, before I got pregnant with Oliver, my cycles were like 53 days. And I remember it being difficult to kind of track symptoms, to know if I was fertile. I had such long cycles. It was quite a troubling time, and it took me kind of 3 cycles to get pregnant naturally, which isn't a lot really. I was lucky, but because the cycles were so long, it was a lot longer than, you know, say friends of mine at that time that had been trying to have a baby. And I was under 30 as well, something that I'd remembered the gynecologist had said, you need to give your best chance at getting pregnant. And I did feel that after that first baby, when my periods did return, they were more regular. For the first time in my life, I was having a period every 28 days, 31 days, I think 33 days. I used to write it down. I'd be like, oh my gosh, pregnancy has actually reset my... Is that common?
I don't know that it's necessarily common, but it's certainly possible. You know, because when you're pregnant, your hormone balance completely changes, and you get lots and lots of the female hormones in your body. So it could be that definitely has an effect afterwards as well. But you can. I mean, I don't have it. Not that I'm aware of. And maybe I have. I can just imagine how stressful that is for some women to be in that situation when perhaps they're not even having any periods at all, but they're wanting to get pregnant. And I think it's really important that women know that if they're not having periods, and when they should be having them, obviously they're not using contraceptive hormone things to stop the periods, that, you know, if you're getting to 6 months without a period, then you should be seeing a doctor to find out why that is. Yeah,
I mean, my GP was amazing. They gave me an ovulation blood test, even though I hadn't been trying for very long. She said, I know you've got polycystic ovary syndrome, ovarian syndrome, let's test you. And I had ovulated, and funnily enough, that was a month I was actually pregnant, but didn't know it yet, with Oliver. And I was pretty lucky with Alexander as well. I think that for women that are watching this, and I get lots of emails from women who are trying to get pregnant, and obviously I'm not a doctor, so I have to refer them on to NHS websites and things, because I'm not able to give, I can only share my personal story sort of out there with the press and on my own channel. Is what would you say if someone hasn't had a period for a while, is having these symptoms? Like, I don't have all of those symptoms that were described here in the list, but I do have sort of 2 or 3 of those. Is the first port of call, go to your GP, have a blood test done, see what comes back, see about a referral for a scan, like to have a diagnosis?
I think one of the things I heard somebody talk about recently was that actually having a normal menstrual cycle is one of your vital signs, if you like. If that's not happening regularly, then it's a sign that something is a little bit out of kilter in your body, and you should pay attention to it. So particularly if women want to get pregnant, I wouldn't wait months and months and months if you're not having periods. But I think generally if you're getting towards the 6 months, then yes, you should, because we don't we don't really fully understand the long-term implications of what we call amenorrhea, not having periods. There's potentially a small risk of developing, having a higher risk of womb cancer if you're not having periods at all. So sometimes the treatments for PCOS actually will involve giving women hormones to stimulate a period so that they intermittently, maybe not every month, but have a bleed. So I wouldn't, although it's handy not having periods, I wouldn't be recommending that women who don't have any diagnosis go for months and months and months without a period, I say, unless of course they are using a hormonal contraceptive that is intended to stop and reduce periods. So don't just think this is great and carry on.
Yeah, and there are different ways to treat the symptoms of PCOS. So I was offered metformin, which I sort of read up on and thought, well, let me give diet and exercise a go first. So I didn't go down that road, but I know people that use it very successfully, and it's helped them lose weight and manage the periods. I was recommended B6 as a vitamin that had kind of substantial studies behind it to say that helps with kind of anxiety and depression and kind of some of the mental upheaval, which can go hand in hand with PCOS, or, you know, it's hard to tell because life is stressful as it is, right?
Yeah,
so it's hard to know, is it just that I'm stressed because that's life, or is it PCOS? I think for me, what I've noticed, because I'm turning 40 in November, is my periods have become like worse. So not always emotionally worse, like, you know, I was saying to my mum the other day that, you know, if I have kind of a fairly okay one emotionally, it gets me with the physical symptoms, you know, it kind of, and then with that can come anemia, and I feel like I don't get a lot of time in a 4-week period of time, where I'm not kind of, because I'm like, you get your PMT and that could last like a few days to a week, then you have your period where you're exhausted and you're in pain or whatever those things, and then you're anemic because you're recovering from your period. I mean, we get like 1 week, some of us, where we just feel okay. I don't know, it's hard to be a woman, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's like, I was thinking, great, I have 1 week where I can go get them and be like my best self, and then the rest of the 3 weeks of that cycle, I'm sort of leaning on my period and its effects on me, and then that's before we even get to perimenopause and then menopause, and I don't know. When I was teaching my sons about period, and I've always been very open about things with them the other day, and you know, I was talking about how I'd had some quite severe pregnancy symptoms with Oliver. It started because we were talking about, I don't know, that Oliver likes digestives, and I said, well, that was the only thing I could stomach when I was pregnant with you, and we're talking about different things, and Oliver said, you know, I feel so lucky that I didn't have to ever be pregnant or have a period. And I thought, yeah, you are very lucky, you know, but I know for some women, they don't have issues, and maybe it is, you know, they have fairly manageable periods. I think there's not enough material out there. I remember as a TV director pitching about directing and producing a documentary on PCOS. There's some quite famous women that had come out to say that they had, instantly the women that sort of public figures that had come out to say they had PCOS were very slim and didn't seem to have this fluctuating weight issue, which I had. And I wasn't like hugely overweight, you know, I want to be real, you know, but I was fluctuating. There were people like Victoria Beckham and Jamie Oliver's wife, Julie Oliver, and Jules Oliver, and there were various other people that sort of come out in the press to talk about PCOS. Yeah. And I'd pitched this idea to do a documentary, and I thought, look, 1 in 10 women or whatever it is, there's a lot of people that are being affected, not just the ones that have it, but their families, you know, like my partner who looks after me if I've got really extreme physical, you know, whatever. So that didn't end up getting greenlit, which I think was a shame. I feel like we need more information about this. I think if this was happening to men, I think it's a feminist issue. If this was happening to men, we would hear a lot more about it. There would be a lot more access and information, but you know, maybe because we don't understand fully why we get it. I felt that there could be some causal link to me taking the pill and getting PCOS. I don't know. I mean, you know, that's unsubstantiated. That was just like a personal thing. Perhaps there was some sort of link there. I think my mum had one cyst, and we think my grandma had one. You know, so it wasn't poly.
No,
so but there was kind of some sort of. But my mum took 2 years to conceive with me as well when it came to pregnancy. So what I'm saying is, I feel like this conversation isn't out there in the public domain enough, really. When people say, you know, it is the leading cause for infertility, yet there doesn't seem to be that much information. Not that I've come across, and I've done quite a bit of research online. That I feel like we need more people to talk about the realities of it as well, and what's kind of helping them manage it. I see a lot about the physical side, possibly not as much about the emotional kind of angst that comes with it. So what's your advice in terms of if people are suffering, if they feel more anxious, if things feel more acute? Can that be symptomatic of PCOS, first of all, from a medical perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely we know that it has, you know, huge effects on how women feel about themselves in terms of self-esteem, particularly if they have got any of the androgen symptoms with the hair growth and problems with losing weight, etc. Then that can have a big knock-on effect to your self-esteem, and it can even lead to depression as well. And like you say, the mood swings can be larger, particularly if there's long gaps between periods and you're waiting for it to kind of build up and build up. But I think what you were saying there, I think a lot of it is because we don't really understand, you know, and we're only really now starting to get to grips with the roles of that insulin and other hormones can have in the body in the wider spectrum away from just blood sugar. And I think as we start to understand more about that, then we may be able to look at better treatment options, because at the moment there aren't really very many at all, other than, you mentioned metformin there, treatments for what you do when you get the acne or when you get the excess hair growth, and then looking at hormones to regulate cycles to actually bring about some kind of bleed, which isn't always what women want anyway. So I think the more we understand it, the more we'll be able to direct the treatments, which I think will give women more hope, and then that in itself will hopefully have a beneficial effect in terms of letting people realize that there is things that can be done, because you don't want to get a diagnosis for something which is limited. But I think the lifestyle is huge, and more information that we can share about that, the better.
Yeah, I remember feeling quite scared as a 19-year-old, kind of having this diagnosis and being told, you know, you need to have a baby as young as possible, essentially. Definitely before you're 30. I remember thinking, gosh, what, you know, I was doing my degree and I wanted to do an MA and become a filmmaker, and I sort of thought, where's this baby meant to fit in? Now, I was lucky in that I did meet someone and had a baby before then, but for a lot of women I know from messages I receive and things, they're quite worried. They may be thinking of having their first baby in the late 30s, they've got PCOS, or they haven't, and they're just, you know, they want now the time that they feel right. Have you got any advice in terms of it's never too late to sort of turn your lifestyle around, to lose weight, to you know, look at diets that could help you, like a low carb diet, embracing exercise and sort of making those changes? I mean, I definitely know that when I was trying to conceive, I did make it kind of, I knew it was harder for me to lose weight, but I did make it kind of a priority that even though I wasn't overweight, I did want to kind of give my body the best chance to, you know, be ready for a potential pregnancy. So there are things that we can do, aren't there?
Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's never too late, but I think it's important to realise that it doesn't have to be an enormous life overhaul. It can just be little things that you do every day in terms of making sure you're getting out more, you're moving more. We know that sitting, she says, sat here for a while, it can have an effect on your metabolism and your insulin resistance, etc. So I think it is looking at all those small things, because they all can add up over the days, over the weeks, over the months, and then have a really big effect. But also I think knowledge is power, and if women think that they have a problem which hasn't necessarily been diagnosed, or they don't have enough information to help them make those decisions about when would be best to start a family, etc., then they should ask and seek advice, definitely.
And during this COVID period, people can still get support, can't they? I know that things are a bit more stressful, but in terms of, you know, my GP's running, you can go in and have an appointment. Obviously, if something's not urgent, you might feel, okay, I'm going to wait a bit longer, but life medically is kind of starting to resume now, isn't it, in terms of
Yeah,
this,
definitely. The GP surgeries are open, you know, and the GPs are there, and they it may be that you're dealt with slightly differently in the fact that perhaps some of it will be done over the telephone, or you may not need to go in, etc., etc. But they're definitely still there. So and not just for urgent COVID-related problems. So definitely,
and referrals are happening, and
yeah.
I just think people need to. I was speaking to a doctor the other day. He said that he was worried because not enough people were going in to see the GP if they were worried about things, and actually that's what they're there for. So this has been really fascinating, Juliet. Thank you so much. So essentially, if you are concerned that you have PCOS, or you're showing some symptoms, or you're trying for a baby and things aren't happening, and you think that could be something you're suffering with, do go see your GP, talk to them. All the GPs I've spoken to are pretty knowledgeable about this. It's a common condition. Read about ways to sort of, think about your lifestyle and making small changes, as Juliet said. And there are sort of options out there. You don't need to kind of suffer on your own. And I believe more research is happening, isn't it, at the moment, Juliet? People are investigating ways to support women more.
There's a good charity, actually, it's worth mentioning, called Verity. Verity, lots and lots of good information on there.
I'll leave that in the comments as well. I'll link to them as well. Yeah, and there's quite a big American site. I've forgotten her name, but I'll look into it and add that in the comments, where she shares lots of kind of dietary insight into PCOS and support there. And I think there's some support groups on Facebook. But thank you so much, Julia. It's been really, really fascinating. It's great to have an expert who can talk about these things, coming from a perspective of having expertise and experience. But I do know personally that it can be a bit of a roller coaster for women, and it's not easy. We don't have all the answers, but I think the more that we can talk and be open about things. Very lastly, before we go, I just wanted to mention, is there some kind of causal link between, or some kind of association with, thyroid problems and polycystic ovaries? I've had a few issues with my thyroid. I mean, I'm not underactive. I've got Hashimoto's. Do people say that sometimes there can be some crossover there, or are you likely, if you've got PCOS, is it worth going to have kind of some tests on that?
Jo, I think there's some crossover in the symptoms that you might experience. So it's likely that if you were being tested for PCOS, that you probably would have a thyroid hormone test done as well. So there may be a link in that way, that maybe women discover those diagnoses around the same time. And the hormonal system links in all the different glands in the body. So although we may not fully understand it, I'm sure there are links and causes that we are fully aware of.
Cool. Okay, well, thanks so much, Julia. That's been really, really, really interesting. I've loved it. So hopefully we can do another one about something else pressing to do with women, but hopefully this will help people, because whilst it's great that I receive the messages, I will always want to defer over to professionals. So thank you, and we'll see you next time, everyone. Bye.
Bye.